Imagine driving home from a long day, minding your business, when flashing lights pull you over. What starts as a routine traffic stop turns into a moment that changes everything. When the officers discover that the woman they just stopped is actually their new boss. This isn't just another story about authority or race. It's about breaking barriers, earning respect, and what happens when people are forced to confront their own biases. Stick around to see how Chief Danielle Ellis, the town's first black female police chief, transforms a skeptical department and community, one powerful move at a time. If you're enjoying this story so far and want to see more content like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got more incredible stories coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thanks for watching, and let's dive back in. It was an unusually cool autumn morning in the quiet town of Brookfield. Deputy Eric Matthews, a seasoned officer, was out on his usual patrol with his rookie partner, Jake Connors. The streets were empty save for a few joggers and the odd car passing by. In the small town of Brookfield, everyone knew everyone. Or at least, that's what Eric thought, until he spotted a sleek black SUV he didn't recognize. The vehicle was turning onto Magnolia Avenue, the main road leading to the town center. Jake, eager to impress his partner, noticed the out-of-state license plate. "That SUV doesn't belong here," Jake said, his eyes narrowing. Eric glanced over at the vehicle. "Yeah, looks like someone's passing through. Should we pull it over?" "Just to check," Jake suggested, his hand already hovering over the siren button. Eric shrugged, indifferent. "Might as well. We'll make it a routine stop. See who's driving around in a car like that." They flicked on the sirens, and the SUV pulled over to the side of the road. As they parked behind it, both officers exited their cruiser and approached cautiously, with Eric on the driver's side and Jake on the passenger's. The tinted windows of the SUV rolled down slowly, revealing a woman in her mid-30s, her skin a deep ebony tone. She wore a tailored gray suit, and her confident demeanor instantly made the officers pause. Her hair was pulled back into a bun, and she regarded them with cool, calm eyes behind a pair of sleek glasses. "Good morning, officers," the woman said, her voice firm yet cordial. "Good morning, ma'am," Eric responded, trying to maintain his authority. "Do you know why we pulled you over?" The woman raised an eyebrow. "No, I don't. I wasn't speeding, and I obeyed all traffic signals." Jake, attempting to assert himself, chimed in, "We noticed your out-of-state plates. Mind if we ask what brings you to Brookfield?" The woman's expression remained impassive. "I'm here for work. Is that a problem?" Eric and Jake exchanged a glance. Something about her tone made Eric uneasy. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but this wasn't a typical stop. Her calmness and confidence threw him off balance. "We just need to see your license and registration," Eric said, opting to play it by the book. The woman nodded and reached into her glove compartment. "Of course. One moment." As she handed over her documents, Eric glanced at the license, Danielle Ellis, and the state, Georgia. Jake leaned in, peeking at the paperwork. "Georgia, huh? That's quite a ways from here. What kind of work do you do?" Danielle looked straight at him, her gaze steady. "I'm your new police chief." Eric blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. "Excuse me?" Danielle smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Chief Danielle Ellis, your new superior. I was appointed last month by the town council." Jake looked like he had seen a ghost. His face drained of color and he stammered, "Chief Ellis," she corrected, handing them her badge, which gleamed in the morning sunlight. "I was just on my way to the station when you pulled me over." Eric's heart sank. He had heard about the town council hiring a new police chief, but no one had mentioned that she would be, well, black. Not that it should matter, but in a town like Brookfield, where diversity wasn't exactly its strong suit, it felt like a curveball. There was an awkward silence as both officers processed what had just happened. Eric had been with the force for over 20 years, and never had he imagined he'd be pulling over his new boss. Jake, still in disbelief, muttered, "We didn't know." Chief Ellis looked at them both with an air of patience, though there was no mistaking the firm undertone in her voice. "I gathered as much. But this isn't the way I intended to introduce myself to my team. Let's just say I expect better from my officers." Eric swallowed hard. We're sorry, Chief. We didn't mean." "To racially profile me?" Chief Ellis finished for him, her words cutting through the air like a blade. Eric winced. No, no, ma'am, not at all. Danielle's expression softened slightly. We'll let this go for now. But understand something, officers, I expect professionalism from my team. No exceptions. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll see you both at the station. Without another word, she rolled up her window, started her car, and drove away, leaving Eric and Jake standing in stunned silence by the side of the road. The small Brookfield Police Department was abuzz with rumors when Chief Ellis walked through the doors that morning. Her unexpected arrival had set the entire town's police force on edge. Some of the officers, particularly those who had served for decades, weren't sure how to feel about having a black woman in charge. Eric and Jake were already back at the station, quietly sitting in the briefing room as the rest of the team gathered for the morning meeting. The tension in the air was palpable, and it only grew thicker as Danielle Ellis entered the room. All eyes were on her as she stood at the head of the table. She held her head high, her gaze sweeping over the room as she assessed her new team. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and confident. "I'm Chief Ellis, as some of you may already know. I've been brought in to make a few changes around here, and I intend to do just that. This department has a strong foundation, but there's always room for improvement." There was a murmur in the room, a few uncomfortable shifts in chairs. Danielle ignored it. "I'm aware of the dynamics in this town. Brookfield is small, and change isn't always welcomed. But I didn't come here to blend in. I came here to make sure we're serving this community the way we're supposed to." Eric kept his gaze down, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. He could feel Jake shifting uncomfortably next to him. They both knew they were in for a different kind of leadership, and the rest of the officers were thinking the same thing. "One of the key changes I'll be implementing is increased community engagement," Chief Ellis continued. "We'll be doing more outreach, making sure that every corner of this town feels seen and heard. And I'll be leading by example." Her eyes locked on Eric, and for a brief moment he felt the weight of her authority. The encounter earlier had left him shaken, but it was clear now, Chief Ellis wasn't here to make friends. She was here to lead. In the weeks that followed, Danielle Ellis proved that her appointment as Brookfield's police chief was no accident. From the very beginning, she faced subtle resistance, not just from some of the officers but from parts of the community as well. Brookfield was set in its ways, and change was never easy. Danielle didn't miss the way some of the veteran officers, especially those who had spent decades in the force, questioned her leadership without ever saying a word. They gave her sidelong glances in meetings, whispered among themselves when she wasn't around, and seemed to resent the new community engagement initiatives she'd started. But she wasn't deterred. Every morning, she walked into the station with her head high and her mission clear. One of the first changes she implemented was open forums, monthly meetings where the community could come in, ask questions, and raise concerns directly to the police department. This was unprecedented in Brookfield. Some residents appreciated the transparency, but others were less enthusiastic, thinking it unnecessary and overly political. Still, Danielle persisted. She knew that building trust with the people required creating opportunities for dialogue, even if it meant facing criticism. The first forum was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the community center. Danielle stood at the front of the room as townspeople filed in, many looking uncertain, some outright suspicious. Eric Matthews and Jake Connors were there as well, along with other officers. They had been instructed to attend, and though most were polite, their body language was clear. They weren't entirely sold on this new approach. As the meeting began, Danielle introduced herself to the crowd, giving a brief but powerful speech about her vision for the town's police force. She spoke about the importance of accountability, about ensuring that every citizen felt safe and respected regardless of their background. "Community safety," she said, "is a partnership. It's not just about us, the officers, patrolling the streets. It's about listening to the people we serve, understanding their needs, and working together to create a better environment." At first, the room remained quiet. Then, an elderly man raised his hand. "We've had a police department here for over 50 years, he said. "Why do we need all these new ideas now? Things have worked fine the way they are." Danielle didn't flinch. She had expected this kind of question. "I respect the history of this department, sir," she replied. "But the world is changing, and our community is growing. We need to adapt to serve everyone better. What worked 50 years ago may not be enough to address the issues we face today. Another hand went up, this time from a middle-aged woman. What about the crime uptick we've been seeing near the south side? How are you planning to deal with that? Danielle nodded, understanding the concern. We're already working on a targeted approach to address crime in that area. But it's not just about increasing patrols or making arrests. We need to look at the root causes. Why is crime increasing there? Lack of resources, employment opportunities, and even community infrastructure contribute to it. I'm not just here to arrest people, I'm here to create lasting change. The crowd murmured, some in agreement, others still skeptical. Eric sat in the back, watching his new boss handle the crowd with poise. Despite his initial reservations, he found himself impressed by her ability to stay calm under pressure and the depth of her understanding. The meeting ended with more questions, but Danielle remained patient and thorough in her responses. By the time it was over, several community members approached her personally, thanking her for listening and promising to attend the next forum. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. As she gathered her things to leave, Eric walked up to her. "That was well handled," he said, his voice tentative. Danielle gave him a small smile. "Thanks. We'll see if it sticks." "I think it might," he added, surprising himself. He had been one of the skeptics, but Danielle was starting to win him over. Maybe she really could make a difference. A month later, the department faced its first true test under Chief Ellis's leadership. The call came in late on a Friday evening. There had been a robbery at a convenience store on the south side. The suspect was described as a black male, wearing a hoodie, last seen running toward a residential neighborhood. Eric and Jake were among the officers dispatched to the scene. When they arrived, the store clerk was rattled but unharmed. "He didn't take much," the clerk said, shaking his head. "Just some cash from the register." As the officers spread out to search for the suspect, tensions began to rise. This wasn't the first time a crime had occurred in that part of town, and there was already chatter among the officers about how to handle the situation. Some wanted to go door to door, searching homes without warrants, while others were ready to pull over anyone who fit the suspect's description. Danielle arrived at the scene shortly after, having been alerted to the situation. She immediately sensed the escalating tension and stepped in to take control. "Let's stay focused," she said, her voice firm. "We're not going to start harassing people based on assumptions." One of the older officers, Lieutenant Barnes, spoke up, his tone sharp. "Chief, with all due respect, this neighborhood has a history. We need to act quickly, or we'll lose the suspect." Danielle met his gaze without blinking. "We act within the law, Barnes. We're not going to violate people's rights just because they live in a high-crime area. If you want to catch the suspect, do your job, question witnesses, follow the leads. But we don't treat people like criminals just because they look a certain way." There was a murmur among the officers, but no one challenged her further. Eric, standing off to the side, watched the exchange closely. He had always respected Barnes, but for the first time, he found himself siding with Chief Ellis. She was right. They couldn't just steamroll over people's rights in the name of expediency. As the night wore on, the search for the suspect continued, and eventually, they found him, hiding in an abandoned shed a few blocks from the convenience store. He was a scared teenager, barely 16, who had been pressured by older kids to commit the robbery. When they brought him in, Danielle was there, watching as the boy was processed. Later, Eric approached her. "That could have gone a lot worse," he said, his tone thoughtful. Danielle nodded. "Could have. But that's why we have to be careful. Every decision we make impacts this community. If we lose their trust, we lose everything." Months passed, and the ripple effect of Danielle's leadership became more evident with each day. The community engagement efforts began to pay off. Residents were more willing to work with the police, and even the officers who had been most resistant to her methods were starting to come around. One of the biggest shifts occurred during a town-wide emergency preparedness drill that Danielle had organized. It was a massive effort involving the police department, the fire department, and other emergency services, along with volunteers from the community. The goal was to simulate a disaster scenario and train everyone to respond efficiently. Danielle had put countless hours into planning the drill, ensuring that every detail was accounted for. On the day of the event, the entire town was buzzing with activity. Police officers were stationed at key locations, managing the flow of people, while community members participated in mock evacuation exercises. At the command center, Danielle monitored the proceedings, giving directions and checking in with her team. She noticed Eric working alongside a group of volunteers, helping them coordinate their roles. When he looked up and saw her watching, he gave her a nod, a gesture of respect that hadn't been there before. After the drill ended successfully, Eric approached her. "That was a hell of an operation, Chief." Danielle smiled. "Thanks. Couldn't have done it without the team." He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I'll be honest, when you first got here, I didn't think you'd last. This town isn't exactly welcoming to change. But you've proven me wrong." "I appreciate that, Eric," Danielle said, her voice warm. "It's not about proving anyone wrong, though. It's about doing what's right for this town." Eric nodded, a newfound respect in his eyes. "I know. And you're doing a damn good job." It wasn't long before word spread about the success of the emergency drill. The town's residents, who had once been divided in their opinions of Chief Ellis, began to see her in a new light. She wasn't just an outsider trying to shake things up, she was a leader who genuinely cared about Brookfield and its people. As the seasons changed and the town settled into a new rhythm, Danielle's presence became a defining force in the department. The officers who had once doubted her were now loyal, having seen firsthand how her leadership had improved not only their work but also the relationship between the police and the community. For Danielle, it wasn't about personal glory or accolades. It was about doing the job right and earning the trust of the people she served. And, in the end, that was exactly what she had done. The small town of Brookfield was no longer the same place it had been when Danielle Ellis first arrived. It had grown, both in size and in spirit. The police department, once resistant to change, had transformed under her guidance, becoming a model of integrity and community service. Eric, Jake, and the other officers who had once questioned her leadership now stood by her side, proud to be part of a department that truly represented the best of Brookfield. And though the road had been long and sometimes difficult, Danielle knew it had all been worth it. She had earned their respect, not by demanding it, but by showing them that real leadership meant putting the people first, always.